Hey everyone, and welcome to Volume 7 of Horror Stories to Help You Sleep. Tonight we have 9 stories, ranging from rules, timelines, and much, much more. As always, if you do enjoy the video, please be sure to drop a like rating as it helps out the channel so much. Let's see if we can reach 1100 likes on this video. Subscribing if you are new is also very much appreciated, as I post content just like this all of the time. I have been posting a ton of stuff recently, so if this kind of content is something that you are interested in, definitely drop a sub. Anyway, I hope you all enjoy the video, and as always, I hope you all have a great night. For the past 3 years, I was an exterminator. Despite what many may think, it's not that bad of a job as long as you weren't afraid of getting your hands dirty. Over my career, I dealt with everything from small mice to big snakes. As far as danger, the only threat I ever experienced was almost getting my eyes scratched out by a rabid possum. I wasn't particularly a huge exterminator. I was just a local guy working out of the back of his van. I spent almost a fortune on all my equipment. The best thing about the job was meeting my partner, Greg. Unlike me, he'd been in the extermination business for a long time. The craziest story he ever told me was about the time he had to remove a huge wasp nest from a church. As exterminators, we never got much business compared to the bigger names, but we made enough to make a living. I didn't have a wife or kids at the time, so making enough to survive wasn't all that hard. Greg was the same, despite being in his 60s. He never mentioned anything about a family. I didn't think it was ever something he cared for. I'm getting sidetracked. Though I have enjoyed the extermination business, what happened a few days ago has made me consider walking away from it forever. I've dealt with a lot in my time, but I never thought I could describe a job as downright unnatural. I received a call a few nights ago. The voice on the other end was that of a woman. She sounded somewhat shaken, but I could tell she was trying to keep her composure. "Hello? Is this Pest Away Extermination?" she asked nervously. "Yes, ma'am. Do you have a pest you need rid of?" I asked. I don't know who else to turn to at this point. I suppose you could describe my problem as a pest." I was somewhat perplexed when she said that, but I tried my best to understand the situation. "Ma'am, do you know what kind of pest it is? Mice, snakes, insects?" I asked. The woman remained silent for several seconds. "Rat," she said. "Rats? No worries. Rats are a very common pest, especially around these parts. Do you know if they're in your ceiling, floor, or walls?" I asked. I don't know. I don't know how to describe it. It's not my house. It's my mother's. She's old and bedridden. I was visiting her when I saw it, looking at me through one of the ventilation ducts. It was so big," she said. The woman's voice began to get shaky, as if she was getting emotional. "Not to worry, ma'am. Rats are nothing to cry over. I'll set an appointment to be there in a few days," I said. The woman gave me the address and information. With that, the appointment was set. Within a few days, we would show up and help with this little rat problem. It was strange, though. As I laid in bed that night, I couldn't help but wonder why the woman was so emotional. When she described the pest as a rat, why did she seem like she couldn't definitely call it that? Something about the entire phone call sent a weird chill up my spine. However, I ignored it and went to sleep. I figured I'd call Greg about it in the morning. The days leading up to the reason I'm writing this were pretty slow. Greg and I dealt with a few minor pests here and there. Greg nearly lost one of his fingers trying to remove a raccoon that had found its way into a trailer. Despite all our fun, I couldn't help but get a strange sense of unease. These were just rats, right? Why did I feel so anxious? Regardless, the woman promised to make it worth our while if we could handle it, and I wasn't about to turn down a good payday. The day had finally arrived. Greg was less than helpful in getting me all the equipment into the van. The old man spent the whole time trying to figure out how to set up the GPS. Of course, I had to do that too. We arrived at the house a little late. The place was big. Nice place for an old hag, huh? Greg said jokingly. Now's not the time for jokes, Greg. The lady's old and bedridden. She probably has more money than you'll ever see, I said. Greg disregarded my smart remark. I finally got to see the woman who made the call in the flesh. She seemed to be in her 30s and well put together. Despite that, I must also add that she appeared as though she hadn't slept in days. Gentlemen, thank God you're here, she said. No problem. When you told me about your problem, I wanted to help you out as soon as I could, I said. I didn't really know who else to go to for this problem. It's weird, she said nervously. Well, we better not waste any time. Let's see if we can't get rid of these little bastards, said Greg. The woman who introduced herself as Crystal invited us inside. The place was incredible. It wasn't exactly big enough to be a mansion, but I'll be damned if it wasn't close enough. The place was full of furniture that probably cost more than everything I own. As curious as I was to ask what these folks did for a living, I preferred not pry into their business. Crystal told us that she believed that vermin were located in the basement, as that's where she'd heard the most noise. You never considered getting a cat? Asked Greg. My mother actually had a cat before she fell ill, but it disappeared. I haven't seen it in a long time. I assume the poor feline just ran off to another family. My mother wasn't able to take care of him anymore, answered Crystal. Crystal led us to the stairs of the basement. The sight of the old wooden stairs descending to an old door was awfully liminal. It seemed like the setup for a cheesy horror movie. Crystal left and allowed us to do our business. Greg went first, descending the stairs. Despite how new this place looked, it was clear that the place was old, judging by how loud these stairs creaked as we went down. Greg opened the door to the basement. Immediately we were hit with a disgusting wave of a foul scent. Jesus Christ, what the hell is that smell? Yelled Greg. The both of us simultaneously put on our gas masks. Yes, we carried gas masks in case we needed to fume the place. The basement was dark. Dust filled the air from the slightest movement. Greg pointed his flashlight around. Sure enough, there were rats. Several rats. Wherever Greg pointed the flashlight, we could see a rat quickly scurrying behind the nearest object. The floor nearly crunched from all the dried rat droppings. These rats were big. Greg began to set down a different assortment of rat traps. I started on the opposite side of the room, setting down different types of poisonous bait. Some of the rats were oddly fearless, immediately going for the bait after I placed it. The job only took about an hour. After we placed the traps, we packed up our stuff and called it a day. I gave Crystal a call and informed her that we would be back within a few days to collect the carcasses. As we ascended the basement stairs, Greg mentioned something strange. You know what's weird? This house is pretty big, but the basement felt so small. I don't know. It just feels like there should have been more to that, don't you think? Greg asked. Now that he mentioned, the basement did feel rather lackluster compared to the rest of the house. Why should it matter? It's a basement. Later that day, Greg and I went our separate ways. I couldn't help but think about what Greg said earlier. That basement seemed all too small, and there was no way those rats were just restricted to the basement. We would probably have to do a clean sweep of the entire house. We wouldn't want to leave any vermin behind. We arrived back at the house the next day. Crystal seemed in bad shape. Her eyes were red and her hair was a mess. She clearly hadn't slept. I could notice her sickly mother in her car. "Crystal, what's going on?" I asked. "I'm getting my mother out of here. Whatever you guys did, it angered it," she said. "What are you talking about, lady? We angered the rats?" said Greg. I assured Crystal that everything was fine. We were going to handle this problem, and she wouldn't have to worry about it. Crystal almost broke down in a heap of tears, but she managed to keep her composure. She hopped in the car with her mother. "Please, end it," said Crystal. With that, she drove away with her mother. I looked over to see Greg had pulled out a revolver from his pocket. "Jesus, man. Where the hell did you get that?" I asked. "You can never be too careful nowadays," said Greg. We started speculating that maybe Crystal was trying to set us up to be robbed. We carefully stepped into the house. Immediately, we could hear them. There was scurrying in the ceiling, the walls, and the floor. One thing was for sure. These rats were on edge. "Looks like they're partying, huh?" said Greg. We slowly made our way to where it all started. We headed down to the basement. This time the smell was far more intense. I've smelled a lot of dead animals in my career, but this was absolutely horrid. We entered the basement to a gross sight. It appeared as though some of the rats had died from our previous traps. It seemed that other rats had been feeding on the corpses. I thought back to what Greg said. The basement seemed unfinished. Rats scurried left and right. The smell was becoming more and more unbearable. The smell was particularly strong behind a large wardrobe. I noticed that there seemed to be an opening behind it. "Hey Greg, help me with this real quick," I said. Greg and I pushed the wardrobe to the side. Our theory was finally confirmed true. There was more to this basement than we originally thought. Behind the wardrobe was a doorway into a dark room. The room was pitch black, but the smell was definitely originating from here. Greg and I turned on our flashlights simultaneously. We scanned the room up and down. There was nothing more than more dusty furniture. At first we didn't think much of it. That's when we heard it. Squeak. Something made a noise from the room, but we couldn't locate it. It sounded like a full-grown man with a deep voice. Greg pointed his flashlight up towards the ceiling. That's when he saw it. What the hell is that?" said Greg. I looked up to see it myself. Sitting on an exposed beam was a person. The strangest thing, however, was that they were wearing a full-body rat costume. His fake rat tail hung down, gently swaying. The flashlight must have caught his attention because he looked straight at us. "Squeak," he said. His voice was so deep, so human. While I was downright terrified, Greg was more confused than anything. Excuse me, sir?" said Greg. He did not respond. He merely continued nibbling on something in his hands. This is where the smell was coming from. The costume was filthy. Real rats crawled on the person's back and shoulders. Other rats roamed around the beams above us. The person turned to face us. We could see what he was nibbling on now. The person shoved a dead rat into the mouth of his costume. I could not see any trace of the person underneath. I could see no eyes, mouth, or exposed skin. "Squeak," he said once more. "Why the hell is this guy pretending to be a rat?" asked Greg. The person's voice was so deep, so nonchalant. It was as if he did not care for our presence. By this point, Greg had gotten infuriated. "Listen, buddy, I don't know what kind of prank you're trying to pull, but you need to get out of here right now," demanded Greg. The person looked down at us. For a second, I swear I could hear him chuckle. Squeak. Several rats jumped down from the beams and attacked us. I felt the small bites of several rats biting into my suit. Greg pulled out his revolver and attempted to fire at the rat man. The rat man jumped down from the beams and merely stared at us. With each second, more and more rats began to overwhelm us. "Seize," he said. In an instant, all of the rats dispersed from us. The rat man approached us. He crouched down to look at me dead in the eyes. I could see nothing but darkness past the mask. Was there even a person in that costume? "Well, well, look what the rats dragged in," he said. Greg managed to sit up and pulled his revolver on the rat man yet again. "Don't make another move," said Greg. The rat man chuckled yet again. A rat leaped from the darkness, biting Greg's hand. Greg dropped the gun. Another rat appeared, grabbed the gun in its mouth, and dragged it off into the darkness. "Who are you?" I asked. The rat man looked down at me once more. He began to laugh. "I'm just a poor little rat," he said. The smell of death emanated off this guy strongly. This looked like a human, but was it? Why were the rats obeying him? It was clear that this guy wasn't intent on letting us leave alive. I had to think of something fast. I watched in horror as more rats crawled from the mouth of the costume. "Squeak," he said. A swarm of rats slowly began to close in on us. "Feast," he said. Just before the rats could attack, I managed to jump up and hit the rat man in the face with my flashlight. Greg managed to quickly catch on. For an old man, he was pretty quick. Rats attempted to crawl up my legs, but I managed to kick them off. I looked to see the rat man adjusting his head. I must have hit him harder than I thought. He twisted his head back in place. Though I couldn't see it, I could hear snapping as he twisted his head back into place. Greg made a break for the stairs. I followed closely behind. The large mass of rats chased us up the stairs. We managed to make it out of the house and into the van. Without hesitation, I stepped on the gas as hard as possible. Greg sat in the passenger seat, gripping his bleeding hand. I pulled out my phone and immediately called Crystal. She answered instantly. "Crystal, what the hell was that?" I exclaimed. Crystal remained silent for a few minutes before she finally spoke. "I'm just as clueless as you. I tried to tell the police, but they didn't believe me," she said. "Who was that? What was that? We nearly died in there," I exclaimed. Crystal didn't exactly have a definite answer as to what was down there, but she definitely knew more than what she told us. Basically, her mother would talk in her sleep. She would say strange things. Something about the fifth horseman and the horseman of pestilence. Basically, her mother had been using her body to feed something in the house. That's why she fell ill. As far as the horseman of pestilence, I'm not exactly sure what that means. Did she really expect me to believe that we somehow encountered an unknown fifth horseman of the apocalypse, and it's a guy in a rat costume? I've been doing everything in my power to try to find some rational explanation for what we encountered that day, but I can't. We have not gone back to that house since. Greg doesn't even want to talk about it. If anything Crystal said holds any weight, then her mother was into some pretty bizarre stuff. Somehow she managed to summon a fucking rat god and trapped it in her basement. If it sounds weird to you, imagine how I feel. I have not even thought about going back into extermination since this happened. I don't think Greg has either. Ever since this happened, I've become paranoid. Every time I close my eyes, I see it. I see that thing staring at me with its empty sockets. Now we come to the reason I wrote this. Today I heard a sound come from my ceiling. It was so quick, yet so noticeable. Squeak. Hey, I'm writing this out of desperation and fear. If you read what I'm about to tell you, please pray for me. I need this more than ever. I won't give specific details about me, as I don't consider them important. I never wanted to go through any of this. If I knew what was happening here, I would have surely moved away a long time ago. It all started last week when a thick fog came into the town, engulfing everything in its cold grasp. At first, I didn't give it much thought. It could just be a natural occurrence, and that's it, I thought. As the days passed, things started to get out of hand. The phone signal just disappeared, and when I turned the radio on, I just heard static. My neighbors suddenly started to act weird, knocking on their walls and screaming late at night. Oh God, those screams. Those screams weren't human. I was too scared to investigate, and instead barricaded myself inside my home. Some days later, after I woke up from the god-awful screams of my neighbors, I noticed something wrong outside. I looked through the window in my room and saw that it was snowing. It can't be. It's the middle of summer. How could there be snow outside? Just as I was trying to grasp the absurdity of whatever was happening, I noticed a fire growing in size. The town's church, located in the other side of the street where my home is, has been set on fire. In the distance, I could hear a loud siren followed by static voices, chanting some sort of incantation. The sounds were so loud I could feel my eardrums shattering, and I quickly lost consciousness. Suddenly, I woke up alone, on an empty and cold valley, engulfed in the same fog that came into my town. As I looked around, I saw a woman dressed in a white dress, with black and long hair blowing in the wind. She slowly walked to me, as a corpse dragging its feet. As I caught a better glimpse of her face, I quickly noticed her eyes, bloodshot and full of sorrow. "Hello?" I uttered. There came no answer. She just stood in front of me, frozen in time. Suddenly, she started shaking and turning into something horrifying. I could hear the bones in her arms breaking as they got longer and longer, with razor-sharp claws at the end. The same happened with her legs, and now, the pale dark-haired woman, which was sitting in front of me, became unrecognizable. Her jaws protruded forwards, and empty, dark sockets replaced her eyes. I was so terrified I couldn't even move, or scream. She stood up and growled in the most dreadful way imaginable. I could feel losing my consciousness again, and I just passed out in the frigid grass. When I woke up, I had a terrible headache, followed by blurred vision. As I started to regain lucidity, I quickly observed my surroundings. I was located in the reception room of the town's hospital. The place was desolate. It looked like the people inside have moved to leave as quickly as possible, as there was a mess everywhere I looked. As I started to look for clues to find out what was going on, I found a note left on the reception table. I could feel the blood run cold in my veins after I picked it up. To whoever reads this note, you are not alone in here. There are creatures roaming the hallways, hungry for human flesh. If you want to have a chance at getting out, pay attention. All of the doors leading to the outside are stuck, and they won't even budge. Do not bother trying to break them, as the sound will attract the attention of the creatures in the dark. Instead, follow the path I've marked on the back of the note. At the end, you will find the way out of this abyss. While traversing the hospital, bear in mind the following rules. 1. The monsters inside are attracted to sound. Be as quiet as you can if you want to stay alive. 2. As long as the lights are working, you should be safe. The creatures are dormant in the light unless you make any sound. 3. If you see the lights flickering, hide as soon as you can. The electricity will turn off and they will start to hunt you. It won't take long before the lights turn on again, so be patient. 4. Don't try to kill or harm the monsters, as they don't have any weakness you could exploit. 5. If you hear voices chanting some sort of incantation, cover your ears with something and don't pay attention to them, or you will succumb to the madness that the others have fallen into. 6. Don't trust everything you see or hear, as this place will try to deceive you. If you fall for its tricks, you will never get out of this hellish abyss. If you need a flashlight, you will find it in an old drawer in the director's office. Good luck, stranger. For a moment, I couldn't even lift my gaze from the piece of paper. What the hell was that? I decided to follow the rules as I didn't want to take any chances. Whoever has written on it surely knows more about this place than I do. I hastily went to grab the flashlight and quietly headed into the void in front of me. I made sure to follow the path indicated on the back of the note, walking through the seemingly endless hallways of the now desolate hospital, a place of pestilence and suffering. Not long after, I noticed whispers coming from all directions. I couldn't understand what they were saying, but I recognized the tone of an incantation. Slowly, the whispers transitioned into voices as they got louder and louder. I quickly covered my ears with the palms of my hands, trying to block as much noise as I could, and continued my journey. After a few minutes, the voices disappeared into thin air, like they never even existed. With each step further, I could feel the atmosphere around me getting heavier and heavier, to the point of being suffocating. Each breath was a struggle. Each step felt like a burden. Deep down, I had the feeling of walking to my doom, and I couldn't do anything about it, as I didn't want to spend the rest of my life trapped inside this nightmare. I suddenly saw the lights above me flickering, and I knew I had to hide. I ran to one of the bathrooms, hiding inside a stall. Not long after, the lights stopped working completely, and I heard loud shrieks coming from the hallways. Whatever was out there was out for blood. My blood. I knew these creatures could sense my presence, feeding off my fear and despair. As I stood in the stall, I heard a loud bang at the bathroom door, and something came inside. It growled and started searching for me. I thought I was done for. As the creature got closer to my stall, I closed my eyes. If I was to die, I wouldn't want to know what that thing looked like. The creature stopped in front of the stall where I was in, and I leaned back into the wall, holding my breath. My heart started racing as that thing scratched at the door, sniffing around. After a few moments, a loud siren echoed through the hospital. The creature rushed through the bathroom door, and for a moment I was safe. As I regained my breath, the lights turned on. It was time to go forward. I exited my hideout and went back on the road to salvation. Something was off about these hallways. As I walked further, I felt like time suddenly stopped existing, and had the sensation of walking into nothingness. I glanced at the note in order to make sure I was still on the right path, and sure enough I was. Then, out of nowhere, I saw a woman sitting in the middle of the hallway. She was sobbing quietly, and couldn't resist the urge to check what was going on with her. Finally, another human being besides me, I thought. As I rested my arm on her shoulder, she turned her head around and looked at me. Her eyes were so full of pain, and I could feel we both shared the same despair of being trapped here. "Are you all right?" I asked. "I guess so. I know how to get out of here, but I'm too afraid to go alone. Do you want to accompany me to the exit?" I agreed. As we walked together, she pointed her finger at a rusty metal door at the end of the hallway. "That's the way out," she said. Just as we got close, the same loud siren from before could be heard outside, followed by the lights flickering. "We need to hurry," she whispered. I rushed to the door and grabbed the handle, but it wouldn't move. The lights ran out and I started to kick at the door in an attempt to break the lock. I could hear loud growls throughout the hospital and loud steps coming towards us. Come on, just open." I couldn't bear the thought of being defeated right at the end. I was so close to getting out of that abyss. I had to find a way to open that door. One of the beasts came rushing towards me, and I pulled out my flashlight, directing the beam towards its skin. The beast screamed in pain and ran away. The woman suddenly came with a dented metal pole in the form of a crowbar, giving it to me. I didn't waste any time in cracking the door open. Without any hesitation, grabbed the woman's hand as we got out of there. The light coming from outside was so powerful it blinded me, and I recall passing out. As I woke up, I found myself to be inside my home, lying in bed. Was it all just a dream? I got up from bed and looked outside. The fog was gone and it wasn't snowing anymore. I thought it was over. I could have never been so wrong in my entire life. It suddenly hit me. The last rule. Don't trust everything that you see or hear, as this place will try to deceive you. If you fall for its tricks, you will never get out of this hellish abyss. I froze in terror. I just broke the last and most important rule. I didn't have time to think about what I just did as the loud siren pierced my ears and I passed out. I woke up in the same hospital as before, but everything was changed. Everywhere I looked, there was blood and human remains. I panicked and started to run through the hallways in order to find an exit from the hell pit I found myself in. I could hear a mix of human screams of death and otherworldly growls coming from each direction. I could get a glimpse of a figure in the corner of my eyes. I'm pretty sure that what I saw wasn't human. The thing started to run after me on all fours, hungry for my flesh and shrieking in anticipation. As the ear-shattering screams echoed through the hallways, I felt the putrid smell of rotten flesh in the air. The electricity suddenly stopped moving, and I was left in the dark abyss with whatever was out there. For several generations, my family has managed the town's lone cemetery. From father to son, for generations, male candlesukiers have passed it down. It has been this way forever, and I will inherit it one day. My father summoned me to the graveyard a few hours after dusk last week, and we were completely alone, with just the wind in the trees for company. He brought me to Mr. Constam's freshly excavated grave. Mr. Constam had died just a week before, and few people in town had the decency to hide their joy. Everyone suspected he'd murdered his wife a few years before, but there was never enough proof to condemn him, and every time his name was mentioned, there was always a good riddance to be heard. My father smoked a cigarette while standing over Mr. Constam's freshly filled grave. He shifted his gaze to me. "You did a fantastic job on this one, son. Within a year, there will be plenty of grass here." He took a deep pull from his cigarette, the blazing flame illuminating the darkness. "I think it's time to tell you the Candlesukier secret, son." I had more faith in my father than anybody else, but curiosity overcame me and asked, "Father, what's the secret?" Go over to Mr. Constam's grave and put your ear to the ground. I was perplexed for a minute as I gazed at him. I took a careful step around the grave and strained my ear to the soil once it was apparent he wasn't joking. I could clearly hear thumping and scraping from underground. I jolted to my feet. Down there. He's still alive. We need to get him, Father. He isn't. My father says as he takes another pull of his cigarette. I could hear banging from underground. He's still alive. Do you recall who embalmed Mr. Constam's son? I did recall. I recalled because I had embalmed Mr. Constam with the help of my father. Right, my father said, tapping the ash of his cigarette. All of his blood was drained and replaced with embalming fluid. I'm sure you remember. I opened and closed my mouth, knowing he was correct, but refusing to accept it. He let out a sigh. Son, funeral customs exist in every society to prevent the dead from rising again. Do you suppose we build a concrete slab over their coffins to protect them from robbers? You are telling me Mr. Constam is dead, and yet scratching at the top of his casket down there, I said. That's exactly what I'm saying. Let's get going, son. It will take him longer to settle down if he hears people above him. I wasn't sure what to make of it. Was my father a murderer with a sadistic streak? Did he strike a pact with a local doctor to assassinate Mr. Constam? Was there any sort of kangaroo court or frontier justice going on here? My father continued to speak, attempting to explain things to me, but I was unable to pay attention. My thoughts were focused on the subterranean banging and scraping. We returned home by car, and my heart was beating as I lay in my bed, unable to sleep. I had to see whether there was even a remote chance he was still alive. It's funny. I had worked in cemeteries all my life, and yet my greatest fear was being buried alive. I snuck out of the home a while after midnight and sprinted the distance back to the cemetery. I climbed into our excavator and drove it to Mr. Constam's grave, where I started excavating. My pulse was pounding, and I was sloppy with the digging, but I got the job done in the end. I slid the bucket under one of the concrete slab's corners and pulled it away from the coffin. I leapt out and slid down the grave, lifting the casket's lid. Mr. Constam laid there with a scowl on his face. His hands were no longer clenched together as they had been when we left him when he was buried. One was by his side and the other was by his head. I saw shreds of silk had been ripped away from the casket's roof, and a cursory examination of his hands revealed that the majority of his fingernails were gone. Evidence of his desperate attempt to escape. Mr. Constam! I screamed and shook his chest. Mr. Constam, wake up. I'm here to save you. My hand rested on the side of his neck. It was cold, and I sat on the side of the casket at that point, unsure of what to do. I was drenched with sweat and grime. Finally, I went into my pocket and pulled out a pocket knife, cutting the back of his left hand with it. The incision dripped a little amount of clear embalming fluid, but there was no additional reaction, and it seemed he was no longer alive. My blood became ice cold all of a sudden, and I knew he was dead. I backed up slowly while watching his expression. Then I jerked backwards, crawling out of the hole in the ground. My progress was slowed as loose soil crumbled under my hands. Mr. Constam, I was certain, was sitting up in his grave, gazing at me. I dug further and was able to pull myself up and out. I rushed back into the grass, trying to keep my breathing under control and not shout or weep. That's when I spotted my father smoking another cigarette on the excavator's tread. He knelt alongside it and patted the tread. I sat down next to him, carefully getting to my feet. Do they all come back? I inquired. His voice was low and steady as he answered, "No, it's rare that you have one that comes back. The ones that do are usually the ones that have done the worst, and they'll do anything to avoid being judged, including returning to a body that no longer lives. They seldom stay long with our ways, though. They're only active for a few hours at most before giving up and accepting their fate. It seems Mr. Constam tried to escape his fate, but death comes for all, son. No matter how hard you try, and Mr. Constam was ready to meet his maker." I couldn't think of anything else to say, so I said, "Oh. Come on, son. Let's cover him up again." I opened the door to the interrogation room, a dreary little room with a short metal table and 2 padded fold-out chairs. The long and bare fluorescent lights buzzed angrily in their sockets overhead, casting a clinical white light over the lone figure sitting on the chair opposite from my entrance. A young man was waiting patiently, his arms calmly and casually splayed out on the table in front of him, his tanned skin standing out even more when juxtaposed over the metal. I noted that there wasn't a hint of anxiety or nervousness in him. I sat down slowly and deliberately in the chair opposite of him, plopping down 2 freshly opened, yellow legal pads and a few pens, just as freshly opened. Every exchange we would make would be recorded, but who had the time to sit down and watch what could potentially be a multiple-hour interview? We sat in silence for a few minutes, both of us carefully studying each other, almost as if we were 2 boxers in a ring sizing each other up before the first punch was thrown. What most of the people I interviewed don't know is that I am never their opponent, the other fighter standing between them and freedom. By the time I am called to visit them, the fight is already over, and their fate is sealed. I am simply the referee. He had what I presumed to be curly hair, closely cropped, almost a crew cut, but the first signs of the curls starting to show at the ends. He was clean-shaven with the hints of a 5 o'clock shadow starting to take root. His lips were full and a lively red, teeming with youth and life. A very attractive, clean-cut young man, but the ones who get away for a long time usually are. I focused on his eyes, which were a light emerald, speckled with mesmerizing golden flecks. The eyes of an exotic sultan or a wayward bandit traversing through the endless expanses of sandy dunes. Considering the circumstances of our meeting, I would have to say he reminded me more of the latter. I earnestly studied his eyes. They say the eyes are the window to the soul, but most of the windows I have seen during my interviews over the course of the years were shattered beyond repair. I have seen bloodshot eyes, crazed eyes, eyes in immense pain, wrecked by withdrawals, and occasionally even grief and remorse. Never to their countless victims, but to the justice being served to them. His eyes were flat. So completely and utterly flat. They betrayed no emotions, the empty state of a bovine or the eyes of a fish on ice at a monger's stall, staring dumbly and endlessly upwards as if it was locked in eternal surprise at its fate. So you might be wondering who I am or why I am here. I began, absent-mindedly running my hand through my graying hair. "Are you a detective?" He asked with a voice that carried no inflection or emotion. Fitting, I thought. Handsome and the strong and silent type. No, unfortunately, I am not. I never had the brains to do it. The 2 very aggressive gentlemen you spoke to earlier are detectives. I am what you call a profiler. A profiler? He said slowly, as if tasting the words as he pronounced it. Yes, I am asked to speak with people like you, people who do very unconventional things. From what the detectives told me in the hall, it seems you already confessed to everything. You killed those people. I killed those people. He stated in a matter-of-fact tone, not a hint of gloating or remorse or anger. He could have been stating another obvious fact like water is wet or fire is hot. I have interviewed more than a fair share who tried to put on a show of insanity, but I could count the amount of people who succeeded on one hand. This guy might actually be a nutcase. Thank you for your honesty. It makes our jobs a lot easier, and your processing a lot easier as well. Now, all these other guys before me might have asked how, where, or even who you killed. I am not here to ask you those same questions. I want to ask why you did it. Why? Why? He dumbly repeated for the first time, a flicker of emotion showing across his face. His eyes had winded in wonder, as if he had never considered this question before, and to be fair, perhaps he never had. He limply raised both his hands and gestured around the room as if the answer was all around us to see. I did it because I could. He let his arms drop slackly back onto the table. The bovine stare returned as flat and lifeless as ever. Truly crazy. This guy wasn't just nuts, he was the whole goddamn peanut farm. So far gone on a one-way ticket to another dimension. Sayonara, hasta la vista. Return all mail to sender. Thank you and pretty please. All the information about the brutal slayings he had confessed to backed him up. No one had found any real trigger or rhyme and reason to his victims, which made tracking him down so difficult. Not only going after the girls that looked like a previous lover who jilted him, or victims who had the mannerisms of an abusive and controlling mother. No signs of anything even remotely sexual about his crimes. Even the method of his executions followed no modus operandi, no known pattern or preferred method of dispatching those unfortunate enough to cross his path. Is there a lot of others like me? The question had caught me by surprise, as I was pondering how to explain to my superiors back in Quantico that I ran into a real crazed killer. An empty report with all these needles, lives lost, and not even a crumb of useful data to be gained. Knowing my luck, the fight back up would be delayed just as same as the flight down to here. At least it would buy me some time to stretch the truth slightly to fill out a passable report. Beg pardon? People like me, he slowly continued, as if carefully choosing his words. I suspected it wasn't the deliberate slowness of self-preservation. Rather, it was probably the few crazed brain cells he had left working overtime to formulate the question he wanted to ask. You mean serial killers? Is that what you call people like me? Well, it's the generally accepted term, yes. So you talk to people like me. The gears in his head running hotter than ever now. But why? I decided to humor him and lean forward over the table as if letting him in on a secret. Our little secret, buddy, until the meds they force feed you over at State puts that tortured little brain of yours finally to rest for what remains of your natural-born life. Well, the people who do what you did think very differently from me or my colleagues. I began. This wasn't the first time I had to give this little spiel. I had given it countless times to curious people at bars, dinner parties, and first dates when they heard my job title. We want to know why you did it so we can try to understand how you think. We are hoping if you can help us, we can prevent others from doing what you did and get them the help they need in time. The words hung in the air between us, not even echoing in the slightest from the bare, soundproof concrete walls. Do you ever get curious? Curious about what? Curious about being a monster. One of my eyebrows cocked quizzically upwards involuntarily. Whether this was a whole act or not, the admission of self-awareness of his crimes would blow a hole wide open against a potential insanity defense. Why do you believe yourself to be a monster? That's what I am, right? You call me serial killer, but really, I am just a monster, aren't I? He had piqued my interest. I am no psychologist, but this was something much better to put in my report than simply checking the little box at the top of my reports marked insane. Why do you think you're a monster? Because you must think you are normal, and I think I am normal. But if the world thought I was the normal one, I would be sitting where you are sitting, not here. He concluded with great effort. Bravo, bravo. A far effort. There, my guy. My shoulders sagged in disappointment. Not exactly the bulletproof statement. The prosecution would need to throw the insanity plea out. I leaned a little bit more heavily onto the table in defeat. You talk to monsters like me all day? Not every day. Or I would be demanding a better salary than what I am getting now. I joked, knowing this would go right over the crazy little head of his. Still, one had to keep himself entertained to last long on this line of work. So, you walk among us monsters all day, and never consider yourself one of us. Consider myself one of you? I'm sorry, I don't really understand. Before I could even react, one of his hands darted over the table and quickly clamped onto my wrist. I almost yelped out in surprise as I tried to pull away. His grip was vice-like, and he kept my arm pinned firmly onto the table. I glanced towards the lone camera at the corner of the room, its red light blinking monotonously, uncaringly. I prayed that the desk jockey watching the feed wasn't fast asleep. Shh, he whispered, and interlocked the fingers from his free hand into mine. I was taken aback by how soft his hands were. And warm. An almost dreamy look came over his flat eyes, the golden flecks seeming to swirl in a hypnotic way. His lids drooped halfway over them like he was a bored child in class on the cusp of being free from the humdrum of school for winter vacation. Daydreaming of hot chocolate, Christmas, and dead bodies. Remember this? He said dreamily, still whispering. The slow and dumb speaking pattern was gone, replaced by an almost wistful tone of voice. These are the hands that killed 11 people. 11 people? The detectives had confirmed he had only a body count of 4 before alerting us. Someone was going to get written up. Look, your hands are not so different from mine. We have the same hearts pumping the same blood to our same hands. His fingers were paradoxically gentle against mine, while his other hand retained its vice-like grip on my wrist. You think you can't do what I've done. Maybe you think you're a good person. Maybe you think you don't have the same disease in you that's in me. You think you can't lift that wrench above your head and have it come crashing down. You think you can't tighten the cord as the dance for life begins. You believe you can't pick up that shovel to begin digging that grave. The first grave of many to follow. I am here to tell you that you can. A sudden momentary flash of anger sparked across his face, so brief that I couldn't even tell if it was there at all. And it's easier than you think. With this, he suddenly released his grip on my wrist. I wasn't even aware of the force with which I was pulling entire arm back during his little speech. The sudden release scooted me in the chair I was in a few inches back from the table. He who walked among the company of monsters, he said, the faraway look still in his eyes, is destined to find in him a monster. It was silent in the room for a minute, the only sound coming from the ever-angry and ever-present fluorescent lights. I had not noticed I was panting and shaking. I rubbed my eyes with both hands to regain my composure. Once I felt that I could continue, I slowly returned my hands onto the table. The same idiotic look had returned to his face. Thank you, I finally said, gathering my unused material from the table. And good luck to you, young man. Take care of yourself in the future. He nodded, but otherwise made no further comments. His eyes followed me as I made my hasty exit from the suffocating interview room. By the time I am posting the recounting of this story, many years had passed since this chance meeting. I had moved on to a director position after a few dozen more interviews, closing the chapter of my life that had me chasing the sickest of the sick all throughout the country. This was the only story that kept me up at night. It was only recently that my curiosity couldn't be kept at bay much longer. I had searched through my old records to contact the person I had run into this bandit devil. Many of the old faces had moved on, and the young man who picked up on the other end was enthusiastic and chipper, the telltale signs of a man who had just graduated from the academy and wasn't fully aware of what he had signed up for. I rattled off the time and date I had that ill-fated interview, and he took only a moment to check on the fancy new computer terminal of his. Sorry, he said in a tone too saccharine for my liking. It's not only highly improbable you had interviewed him, it's impossible. The killer had been processed to a completely different county jail, as the judge had immediately designated him a flight risk and remanded him without bail. The note on his terminal said that I had showed up a few hours late, and the powers that be had transferred him before I had even set foot into that building. I asked if there were any other prisoners who were being held at roughly the same time as him. He checked, but it appears it was only non-violent criminals who were being held at the time, probably unpaid traffic violation fines or drunks. When the transfer of information happened from paper to the new computer systems, only the ones of interest had been transferred over. That list was lost to time. Who am I to stop the march of progress? Even now I sometimes lie awake at night and wonder if it was just a local miscreant who was sobering up playing a prank on an overworked and aging government schlep. I sometimes wonder if he was ever truly insane to begin with. No matter. The words, whether it was said in jest or a darker thought from a monster, has stayed with me throughout the years. I am writing the story now because lately, I have been entertaining the thoughts of the things that I could possibly do. When I am driving home late at night from the office through the long stretches of lonely highway and see a young girl thumbing for a ride. When I am in a different city waiting for the train alone in the wee hours of the morning with only another retiree also waiting, who's probably had a bit more than his usual six-pack that night. When I am hiking for my weekly exercise and cordially walk past another person in the thick wilderness and my hand subconsciously feels the outline of the survival hatchet I keep concealed for my protection. I am writing this to warn you. He who walks among the company of monsters is destined to find in himself the monster. Okay, this is something I experienced a few years back. During the summer break, my sister and I were visiting our aunt who lived in the country. Her house is located in a fairly wooded area, but there are several neighbors around. There's a man-made lake about a mile away from my aunt's place, and it is pretty much surrounded by woods. Me and my sister loved to walk around near the lake whenever we visited our aunt, ever since we were little kids. So this time too, we decided to go for a walk. It was about 5 p.m. and the sun was shining brightly. We were told not to walk alone near the lake because there could be wild animals or poachers and whatnot, but we decided that we were old enough to go alone, 15 and 13 years old. So we snuck out while the adults were chatting in the living room and strolled along the path to the lake. The air is fresh, the sun is bright, and we were feeling like we could take over the world. We were walking along the wooded path to the lake when my phone rang. It was my mom who was at the aunt's. Because we snuck out without telling them and we were almost at the lake, I didn't answer it and put the phone into silent mode. Stupid, yeah, I know. Then we reached the lake, take our shoes and socks off and dip our feet into the cool water. We talked for some time, regular teen stuff. I was telling a joke to my sister when this horrible feeling washed over me. It was like I was being watched. I instantly whipped my head around because I thought there was a perv or something stalking us, but there was no one around. My sister too seemed to be spooked by something. She asked me, "Did you feel that?" And I said yes. We sat there for a few minutes holding each other's hands and hearts in our throats, but nothing happened. The feeling eventually went away, so we brushed it off. After some time, we got bored and decided to search for something to eat. The woods around the lake were practically full of wild berries, so we decided to go pick some. I found a nice patch of berries not far from the tree line, and we quickly started picking them up and shoved them into our mouths. I had finished half of the berries I had picked when I noticed a really cool bug on a leaf. I wanted to snap a photo of it because I hadn't seen it anywhere else. I searched my pockets for the phone and it wasn't there. My sister asked what was wrong and soon we both started crawling around searching for the phone. It was a fairly new one and quite expensive, so I absolutely did not want to lose it. "Don't freak out, sis," my sister M said. "Let's just give it a ring. If it's nearby, we'd hear it." She took her phone out and called my number. Instantly, my ringing tone starts going off to the left of us. It was near the path we took into the forest and was pretty loud. So I take a step to go and retrieve it, but M grabs me by the wrist and stops me. "You turned the silent mode on, didn't you?" she asks with a shaking voice. That's when it dawns upon me. I was 100% sure I turned it on. If the phone is silent, then what the fuck is making the ringing tone? Then we realize that the entire forest is silent other than my ringing tone. Dead silent. M's grip on my wrist tightens. We look at each other with sheer terror in our eyes. Suddenly the ringing stops. Silence. We waited for another 10 seconds. That's when we heard it. My aunt called out to us from somewhere deep in the woods. "M, T, I'm here." We froze. It sounded like our aunt, but my gut told me that it wasn't. Something was off about it. Like the usual emotions were absent. It was almost mechanical, like someone mimicking something he had heard before. Then the voice called out again. This time, it was definitely wrong. It was closer to an animal trying to speak. I screamed at M. "Run." So we ran. Ran like all hell was loose and fucking demons were driving us out of the woods. During the time we ran, I could hear something following us hot on our heels. Twigs snapping, leaves crunching, and occasional screeching noises. Almost like a wild cat, but far more sinister. It reeked of evil. We ran past the lake as fast as we could and finally reached the paved road where several vehicles were parked. The woods also ended there. We were out of breath and scared to the core. I turned around to look. There was nothing. Several people gave us concerned looks, but no one asked anything. We walked with a group of folks who were heading in the direction we needed to go. We kept looking around, but the usual sounds were there, like birds singing. When we got home, we were immediately grounded. We were not allowed to go for walks for the rest of the time we stayed there, even with an adult. We didn't protest. Sometime later, I described this encounter to my aunt. She looked at me, her face as white as a sheet of paper, but she didn't say anything. I tried to press her for information, but every time she shook her head and refused to talk about it. Later, I heard their town had a lot of disappearances after our experience, especially kids and homeless people. I don't know if these things are related, but something tells me they are. Both my sister and I get shivers when we talk about it, considering how close we were to being abducted or even killed. I don't know about crawlers and rakes, but I believe that's what we meant. Every working stiff on staff at the Deux Hotel knew about the man with the hatchet. I thought it was a load of garbage, a patois of urban legend, construction site tall tales, and the inherent creepiness of an old building, particularly one in downtown Los Angeles. Once upon a time, the Deux was a gold-leafed den of luxury frequented by movie stars and foreign dignitaries. It devolved into a flea bag with cum-stained sheets between the 60s and 70s, stood abandoned and crumbling by 1985, then was snatched up in 2019 by the Hassan Group, an out-of-state hospitality conglomerate taking advantage of city incentives to revitalize Spring Street. By then, the Deux had been bank property for over 3 decades, and the bank was not known for taking good care of its properties. It was a real snake pit before remodeling started. The first round of construction workers found used syringes, exploding pipes leaking filthy black water down the walls, rotting food crawling with cockroaches, and uncommissioned artwork all over every flat surface courtesy of local street gangs. Then there was the man with the hatchet. They found him on the second floor, forever in profile on the south wall. Someone, for some reason, had painted the crude black silhouette of a man on the cracked plaster, holding an axe with both hands over his head. In triumph, said some. In surrender, said others. He seemed to shoot out of the floor, and he had no feet. It appeared as though his feet had been cut off at the ankles. The construction workers didn't like him much. Most felt uneasy when looking directly at the man with the hatchet. The jumpiest of the group went so far as to insist they'd seen him move. Out of the corner of an eye, he'd be out of place. Sometimes turned around, sometimes with the hatchet hanging at his side, but by second glance, he'd moved back to his original position. They tore out the carpet, they rewired the electricity, they slopped layer after layer of primer on the walls, then pale yellow. But even after 5 coats, the faint outline of the man with the hatchet on the second floor could still be seen through the paint. No matter, it was decided. The decorator shoved an antique chest of drawers up against the wall, and no one was the wiser. The revitalized hotel opened in mid-2021. I, slumming my way through a gap year between liberal arts college and law school, took a job working the graveyard shift. It was a pretty easy gig. Sure, I had to deal with the occasional over-friendly transient or sloppy drunk, but most nights I spent poring over my LSAT study book and answering the occasional phone call from a guest with a bug up their ass. The Ladue was a month into its comeback when I received my first odd call. Business had been consistent but south of mind-blowing since our soft open. Last weekend, however, there was a large finance event at the convention center, something with tech and synergy in the title, and we were booked solid. The call came at 2 a.m. on Saturday from a guest I'll call Lois, an investment banker in town for the conference, staying alone in room 212. "Can you tell the neighbors to keep it down?" Lois snapped. "It sounds like they're smacking something with a stick. My fucking door is shaking." It's a weird complaint. I hadn't heard anything from my desk, and I could hear a toilet flush on the 3rd floor. The walls were thin, but for the sake of due diligence, I went upstairs to investigate. Nothing. The halls were silent and still as a tomb. I went back to my desk under the impression Lois was either seeking attention or batshit. 2 hours later, I was jolted up from a catnap by the lobby phone ringing again. "Are you kidding me?" I recognized Lois's voice. "They're at it again. Thump, thump, thump. It's 4 in the fucking morning. Make it stop." Again, I dragged myself upstairs. I went right to room 212. Stood there with my eyes closed and my ears peeled. Even pressed my ear to the door. I heard the creak of someone turning on their mattress. Then nothing. Later Saturday morning, as I was half-assing the last of my tasks before the morning guy took over, a bony brunette in her 30s with a round face and a wrinkled gray pantsuit stumbled into the lobby. And when I say stumbled, I mean she half fell, half slid down the stairs in dumpy flats. From her heavy eyes and pinched frown, I deduced this was Lois. She made a limping beeline for my desk. "Did you manage to get some sleep?" I asked, with as much sympathy as I could scrounge up at 7 a.m. Lois tossed me a pouty glare. "Of course not. Every 15 minutes the idiot was at it again. Thump, thump, thump. And what is wrong with your beds? I woke up today and my feet are killing me." I apologized for her distress and promised a discount. I would have moved her or directed her to another hotel, but thanks to the conference, there wasn't a free room in a 10-mile radius. Just after midnight, Sunday, everything got stranger. 5 minutes into my shift, I looked up to see Lois plodding her way down the stairs, appearing even messier than she had in the morning, descending slowly and laboriously. She clung to the railing like a crutch, her face contorting with each step. Finally, painfully, she made it to my desk. "Hey you," she said to me. "Have you noticed any unsavory people hanging around? Drunks, stalkers, druggies, whatever?" I shook my head. "Why do you ask?" She leaned in close. Her face was blanched. Her eyes were bloodshot and her breath was sour. "You're going to think I'm crazy," she said discreetly. "But I keep on getting that weird, tingly feeling that someone is watching me. And I swear, in the hallway I saw a shadow move. But there was no one there but me." I pitched another apology speech and said I'd keep an eye out. She thanked me, turned, and began her lumbering ascent back to room 212. 3 hours later, I heard the scream. The scream came from upstairs. I ran for the night security guard, a gregarious meathead named Bill, and together we searched for the source. We didn't have to look far. Lois, dressed in a nightgown, huddled on the floor against the wall on the 2nd floor. A blubbering heap. Several other guests had rushed out of their rooms. They hovered impotently in a confused circle. The woman in 210, Lois's coworker, was trying to calm her down. Upon seeing Bill's uniform, Lois's dark-rimmed eyes bulged. She rolled onto her feet, got a half foot off the ground, and fell back down with a pained cry. "There was a man in my room," she said. I saw him standing over me. He had an axe." "Did you happen to see what the man looked like?" Bill asked, reaching for his radio. Lois shook her head. "It was too dark. I just woke up, and this dark, shadowy figure was right above me. I screamed and ran." It was determined that none of the other lodgers had seen this man. No shadowy figure with an axe had come through the lobby. The second floor windows don't open, and the emergency back exit trips the fire alarm. Thus, Bill and I came to the conclusion that the mad assailant must still be in room 212. The story of the man with the hatchet fluttered in my head. I'm sure it kicked at Bill's conscience as well. We'd both heard the same fish stories. We shared a half second of wild, anxious eye contact before the crazy flew out of our ears, and we remembered we were not only adults, but the professionals expected to control the situation. Bill nodded, hand on his nightstick, me at his elbow. He opened the door of room 212 and flipped on the light. We saw nothing. No deranged axeman in the room. No deranged axeman in the closet or in the bathroom or under the bed. Window shut tight. The other guests rolled their eyes and shuffled back off to bed. Lois was a wreck. Her co-worker in 210 let her sleep in her room. Bill returned to the front door. I returned to my desk, and we all enjoyed a quiet, boring rest of the night. At 6:30 a.m., I was rudely torn from the logic problem I had been pretending solved by the jangle of the lobby phone. On the other end was a shrill female voice. This is Kate Wong." The woman stammered. "Room 210? I need an ambulance now." I didn't ask questions. I put Kate Wong on hold, dialed 911, radioed Bill, the security guard, to keep a lookout for the paramedics, grabbed our dusty first aid bag, and dashed up the stairs to room 210. Lois lay on her friend's couch. Frizzy brown curls stuck to her shiny round face, flushed and swollen with tears. Her pastel pink nightgown clung, soggy and darkened, to her clavicles. The thin sheet she'd thrown over herself was similarly moistened, tangled, and hiked up to her knobby knees. I started towards her with the first aid bag. She hollered at me to stay away. I caught sight of her feet and I almost puked. Her feet looked like two gobs of chewed bubble gum on a dirty park bench. Swollen patches of raw pink cauliflower flesh from her ankles to her soles, surrounded by tough black leathery skin. Her left heel was gone. In its place, a crater of bulging red globs and dried yellow discharge, ringed by thick, white dead skin. The two littlest toes on her right foot were shriveled and black and ashy at the ends, like cigarette butts discarded in an ashtray. "My feet are burning," she screamed. "My feet are burning." The paramedics arrived. I was unceremoniously hustled to the hallway as they lifted Lois onto a backboard, carried her down the stairs, strapped her onto their gurney, and hauled ass to Good Sam. Sirens wailing. 18 hours later, Kate Wong strode back through the doors of the LaDeckard. It was shortly after midnight, Monday, right as I clocked in. She'd been at the hospital all day. She came to my desk to thank me and to offer a rudimentary, if unsatisfying, conclusion to the saga of Lois and the mysterious axe-wielding creeper. Lois was going to be staying in town a little longer than she'd planned to. The doctors didn't know exactly what was wrong with her. Their best guess was some mutant breed of aggressive staph infection. Complications of untreated type 2 diabetes had also been tossed around. One way or another, during her 2-night stay at the LaDeckard, The tissue and blood vessels of Lois' lower extremities had sustained irreparable damage, and now amputation was the only option. They were going to remove both of her feet, hack them off at the ankles. I don't know what became of poor Lois. For all I know, she'd picked up a bug in a dirty hot tub. Maybe it was diabetes, and maybe she'd had it for months, but was too busy to properly manage her health. Maybe it was a side effect of systematic ailment that also tormented her with loud thumps no one else could hear, and made her hallucinate a shadowy man with an axe standing over her bed. I'm sure there's a logical explanation for it all. A logical explanation that has nothing to do with the footless, pitch-black man with the hatchet, buried under so many layers of paint and an antique chest of drawers at the end of the hall on the second floor. There has to be. I'm not crazy. I don't believe in curses or ghosts, and I know a spray-painted figure couldn't possibly become sentient and turn a pair of perfectly normal feet into those blackened, bloated hunks of rotten meat jutting out from under Lois's nightgown. And I'm equally sure there's an equally logical explanation for what I saw. 3 days later, while zoning at my desk at 2 in the morning, staring mindlessly at my shadow against the pale yellow wall across from me. I slumped on one arm. My shadow slumped on one arm. I drummed my fingers. My shadow drummed its fingers. Then loud laughter, and the sound of the front door opening. A group of 40-something businessmen filed in, faces flushed, loudly debating some call made during the football game they'd just watched at the sports bar across the street. They didn't so much as look at my way as they tromped across the lobby and up the stairs to their rooms. But they jolted me out of my half-asleep haze. A ton of bricks dropped in my stomach. A second later, my conscious mind caught up to my body's instinctive panic. My shadow was gone. The businessmen, as they crossed the lobby, cast no shadows on the pale yellow wall. It would have been impossible for them, or me, to cast a shadow on the wall across from my desk. The light was in front of us. I snapped my head to the closest door. I looked just in time to see a pitch-black body, like a three-dimensional silhouette, exit the hotel. I only saw it for a fraction of a second, but a long-fingered, completely opaque human hand lingered on the doorframe for a millisecond more, before the figure disappeared into the night. I quit my job the next morning. Later, I took to the internet. I googled Hatchet Man graffiti, Axe Man plus black paint, scary graffiti plus axe, and such for hours. It took a while, but I found a photograph on Reddit. The OP claimed to have taken it at an abandoned facility in Maryland. The picture was of the crude black silhouette of a man, painted on cracked plaster, holding a spiked ball in one hand. He seemed to shoot out of a corner, and one of his arms was missing. I scrolled through the comments. The post was from 2014. The OP had commented once more in 2017 to clarify that none of the urban explorers upvoting the thread should bother trying to find that abandoned facility in Maryland. It had been torn down after one of the OP's exploring buddies contracted flesh-eating bacteria there. The poor guy's arm had to be amputated. The next Reddit photo I found had been taken at a foreclosed commercial warehouse in Epping, Victoria, Australia in 2012. It depicted a crude black silhouette of a man, painted 30 feet high on a cinder block wall. A sword dangled from one two-dimensional hand. This one was missing his head, cut off at the neck by the ceiling. I read the comments on this post as well. Most of them were disappointed adventurers who'd schlepped all the way to that abandoned warehouse, only to find that the silhouetted man with a sword was nowhere to be found. Then the OP rejoined the discussion. He'd apparently returned to the warehouse himself. To his surprise, he realized the disappointed adventurers were right. The black spray-painted man had disappeared, and it wasn't as though he'd been painted over. The cinder blocks of the walls were untouched. Hands trembling, icy tendrils tightening around my spine, I googled Epping, Australia plus crime, and Epping, Australia plus fatal accident. With a burning rush of adrenaline, I deemed my hunch correct. On February 20th, 2013, the body of a 26-year-old Australian woman, Jessica Follow, was found on the side of a road. The crime was horrific and still unsolved. Someone had, in one quick, precise sweep, beheaded Jessica with the brutal efficiency of a guillotine blade. I glanced back at Reddit. The foreclosed commercial warehouse was on the same street where Jessica's body had been found. And based on the comments, after February 20th, 2013, no one saw the headless silhouette man ever again. So yeah, I'm pretty sure there's a logical explanation for what happened at the Ladue. Just like I'm sure there are logical explanations for what happened to the urban explorer in Maryland and Jessica Follow in Australia. There's no way a two-dimensional army of spray-painted figures, wielding weapons, lurking in destitute places all over the world. And it would be utter fantasy to suggest these silhouette men are seeking out their missing appendages and commandeering them for unsuspecting victims. Just be careful out there, will you? It's an open secret in our small village. My great-grandfather Nicholas was not buried under the tombstone bearing his name in the local graveyard. His last wish was for his remains to be lowered in a hole in front of his house and an olive tree planted above. The tree is the first thing I see every morning when I open the front door, and I have to watch it carefully. I'm in my late 50s now and I live alone. My name is not important, and the name of the village is better left unsaid. Once something takes root in people's imagination, it never lets go. It just keeps growing and adapting with each generation. Over the years, whispers have turned into scary stories used by parents to frighten children into obedience. When I was a young girl, I even overheard some of the other kids sharing these tales. Some say old Niko did the devil himself to the olive tree before he died, and if an unassuming wanderer rests his hand on the trunk, he will be absorbed and become one of its gnarly branches. More recent tales involve a UFO that landed where the tree is now, and entities that shared their alien knowledge with my great-grandpa in return for something. There is a grain of truth in every story, I guess. But here is what I know to be true. The tree does not want anyone who's not a member of this family to come near. If you're with me, you'll be fine. But if I'm not there, I can't guarantee your safety. Best case scenario, you'll get really sick. Worst case, well, you'll see soon enough. The fence surrounding my property is tall for that reason. There is a sign in front of the olive that warns, "Do not come near the tree." For extra precaution, my later father wrapped barbed wire around the trunk of the olive to discourage anyone foolish enough to climb it. I don't have dogs to guard my property. The poor animals would last only a few days before going crazy and then die or disappear. Birds avoid the olive tree and never land on its branches. About 3 weeks ago, on a cold and cloudy November day, I was returning home from work and it was just starting to get dark. Before I got in the house, I spotted something orange beneath the olive tree. It was a jacket caught in the barbed wire. A chill went through my spine. Next to the jacket, on the ground, there was a small digital camera mounted on a stick. It was still recording. I will describe the content of the footage here as best I can. 12:04 p.m. You recording? Okay. Hi folks, Johnny here. You loved our narration of the creepypasta Old Niko's Tree, and today we are doing something special, said the boy standing by the tall wire fence. My house and olive included in the shop behind him. Johnny wore a skull mask with horns. The image suddenly dropped and there was a loud thud as the recording device hit the ground. Malik, watch it. My dad's gonna kill me if we break his camera, said Johnny. The other boy picked up the camera and for a split second, I saw the sleeve of his jacket. It was orange. Sorry, dude. Alright, go on, said Malik. Oh, and tell them to like and subscribe. People actually hate that shit, you know. Johnny objected, but he said it anyway. Here behind me, you can see the actual tree that the story is based on. We are going to go closer in a second and show you the tree, but first, we are going to see if anyone's home. They walked along the fence and came to the gate. To my surprise, it was open. I never forget to close and lock it. Or so I think. When you do the same thing mechanically every day, you start to question yourself if you really didn't. Oftentimes, I don't even remember driving to work. Inaudible, quite remote. We had to walk like 2 hours from the bus stop. Thanks to commenter D's Nuts 6969 for telling us the location. Alright, you can pause until we ask the owner for permission, Johnny said and took off the mask. He looked about 18. 12:21 p.m. No one's answering the door, but the gate was open and Malik said he saw something walk behind the house, right, Malik? Said Johnny. Right. Just as we walked through the gate, I think I saw someone with long gray hair go behind that corner. I'm not sure. As I said earlier, I live alone and I was at work at the time. I do have long gray and curly hair though, so it was a bit strange that the boy said that. There is nothing behind that corner other than some stacked firewood as the footage showed a second later. I think we'll just film the tree really quick and go home, Johnny said. The footage was a bit jumpy as they walked to the tree. They stopped to film the sign. Whoa, warning, do not come near the tree. And look at the trunk, dude. Zoom in on that rusted barbed wire. Spooky stuff. Who knew that an olive could look this evil? Alright, go stand in front of the tree and say a few words, and then we're off, said Malik. Wait, the sign says not to. Pfft, you really believe that shit? As John walked to the tree, I noticed something stir in the branches above. I had to replay that moment a few times just to be sure. For a fleeting second, a dark shape like a shadow moved from one branch to the other and vanished from view. I don't think the boys noticed it since they didn't say a word. This tree right here behind me is old Niko's olive, said Johnny, masked up and looking at the camera. He was... Did you hear that? Johnny's eyes went wide and he froze for a moment. The camera's microphone barely caught the sound. A faint clicking noise. What was that? He gasped. I don't hear anything, said Malik. Johnny looked to the branches above, jerking his head left and right as if trying to follow something that moved rapidly. What? Shh, Johnny said. Malik pointed to the camera to the branches. The leaves moved to the slight breeze. All was silent. There's nothing. What did you see? He asked. Give me the camera, Johnny whispered. 12:44 p.m. Johnny went around the tree a few times filming the branches. Finally, he pointed the camera at his friend. Malik looked a head shorter than Johnny and wore glasses. What's the matter? What did you see? Asked Malik. I don't know. I didn't really see. I sensed something, Johnny said slowly. His voice lowered to almost a whisper. I kinda think it was too fast to be seen or filmed, if that makes any sense. It absolutely doesn't. Now stop trying to scare me and give me that camera. There. Johnny jumped. Do you feel that? He pointed the camera at the tree and moved slowly upwards to the gray sky. The clicking sounds had returned. No. What? Said Malik. It's clearer now somehow. I can almost make sense of what it's saying. Johnny said. Who? Just stop it, Johnny. There's nothing here. Hold this. I need to get closer. The camera changed hands. Johnny took off the mask and touched the tree carefully, avoiding the barbed wire, and placed his hands and feet in the holes of its gnarly trunk. He started climbing. What are you doing, dude? Get down. Malik shouted. Look, just trust me. I can hear it. The tree is speaking. This is stupid. We're cutting this out. Malik said. I'm not losing subscribers because of your bad acting. Johnny was silent and continued to climb carefully. He crouched in the branches and, after a few moments, started nodding. 1:20 p.m. Are you still filming? Asked Johnny. Yeah. I'm going to tell you what I've learned now because for some reason, I think I'll forget it the moment I'm back on the ground. Johnny frowned, looking down. Oh, for fuck's sake, Johnny. This is getting weird. Malik said. Just shut up and let me talk, okay? Johnny hissed. The mask fell out of his jacket pocket. He paused as if collecting his thoughts and continued calmly. His name was Nicholas. He was an only child. His parents were simple farmers. Niko's life was hard before the war. The war had dragged him to remote corners of Europe, and he returned home a changed man with a dusty tomes of books under his arm. Wait, said Malik. I said don't interrupt me. But that's not how the story goes. Johnny looked quietly at his friend for a moment and continued. Niko refused to tell exactly where he found the books and did not let anyone near them. To his wife's displeasure, he started spending money on more books, mainly Arabic and Greek dictionaries. He learned a great many things. One of them was grafting, and he was sought after in the village because of it. Niko had 3 sons. 2 of them died young, and he swore he was going to do anything he can to protect the rest of his family. Years passed, and when old Niko saw that death was just around the corner waiting for him, he gave his son instructions on what to do after he's gone. Johnny pointed to the ground. The son buried him here and planted a young olive tree that his father had specially prepared for that occasion. Niko didn't want anyone peering in his book, so he took them to his grave. A funeral was also organized at the local graveyard where an empty coffin was lowered in the ground, as Niko did not want to anger the church, nor did he want the villagers to know. I was shocked at hearing that because it was word for word the story that my late parents told me. How do you know all that? Said Malik. Are you pulling this out of your ass? Even if the dude really is buried here, so what? What's so special? Don't you see? Johnny said. It's for protection. Whatever black magic fuckery old Niko did here was to protect his family after his death. When someone comes near the tree in the house without the approval of his descendants, it triggers some kind of defense mechanism. What do you mean? Said Malik, his voice quivering a bit. It means we're fucked, buddy. Johnny laughed nervously. Let's just go home, dude, Malik said. This is our home now, replied Johnny. There was a loud metallic bang and the footage jumped. I recognized the sound of my gate closing shut. The camera spun around, but there was no one else to be seen on the property. You need to get up here quick. It's not safe down there, said Johnny. What the fuck are you talking? The clicking sounds again, but now they were loud enough to drown his words. Any other sound on the footage. They clicked faster and faster, and they were getting closer. Malik dropped the camera and let it fall on the grass face down, so the rest of the video is just a black screen with audio. There was a loud tearing sound, which was, I presume, Malik's jacket getting caught on the barbed wire. "Take it off, quick, get up," Johnny shouted. After a few moments, all was deadly quiet. "Oh God, what do we do now?" Malik said, his voice quivering. "Johnny, my phone's dead. Yours?" "Same." "Do you see them?" "Yeah." "What do they look like?" "Almost human," Johnny said quietly, and it was difficult to hear everything he said. "They serve..." Malik replied something, but the conversation had lowered to a whisper, and I could not make out anything. 3:11 p.m. A groan pierced the long silence. "Johnny, what's wrong?" "I can't lift my legs." "What?" "My shoes are like glued to the branch." "Dude, look, the bark. It grew around. It's holding your shoe." "I'll just take the shoes off." "How are you so calm about this?" 3:40 p.m. There was whispering, but again I couldn't make out anything. "Johnny, who are you talking to?" Malik said. "Johnny, hey, look at me. What are you saying? I don't understand." "Wait, let me get closer." 3:50 p.m. "What? Why are you looking at me like that?" Malik said. "And why are you smiling?" He screamed. "Johnny, no, get off me." I heard a loud thud and the sound of clicking began again, drowning everything else. 5:13 p.m. There was silence until I got home. I could hear the sound of my car's engine and the door slamming shut when I got out. But I also heard something else. A distant whisper of voices speaking in unison. "She's home." Click. "She's safe." Click. "We sleep now." I went outside in the dark. Rain drizzled. All was silent and nothing stirred around the old olive. I needed to get some firewood, and I jumped as I saw what waited for me around the corner. Johnny's mask lay on top of the chopped pile of wood, grinning at me. Tears went down my cheeks as I thought about the boys who could have been saved if I was home that day, if I knew that someone would come. This was the first major incident in my time that I know of. I've heard tales from my parents about the things that happened here before, but I've never witnessed it until now. I won't allow this to happen to anyone again. The next day I installed security cameras and an alarm that would warn me if someone is on my property. The cameras are set up to record only motion, but on some days they are just recording non-stop, even though nothing moves on the footage. I guess early retirement it is. You probably heard the saying, "A society grows great when old men plant trees in whose shade they shall never sit." They don't mention what other things may sit and wait in the shade with us. Things I have to live with. There are people downstairs and I don't know who they are. I don't remember why they're here. I don't remember why they are shouting my name. I don't remember a lot of things anymore. Please don't forget me. Remember, remember, remember. I made my fortune selling some middleware I had been working on in my spare time to a growing tech company. This was back in 2002, or was it 2003? A long time ago. I was barely in my 30s and rich beyond my wildest imagination, but you quickly realize money brings little joy when you've got no one to share it with. I had someone back then. I still remember her face. I do. I promise. She had eyes that would weep at Christmas adverts. She had hair that would turn brown at the roots when she hadn't been to the hairdresser's. She had a crooked smile that would reveal itself when she danced. She was mine, then she wasn't. She was killed the day after we celebrated 1 point something million pounds arriving in our bank account. October 19th, I remember. We were rich, we were happy, then we weren't. A snowstorm, black ice, car found at bottom of cliff, her green eyes, her dyed hair, her crooked smile all wiped from the earth. I remember trying to identify her. It was near impossible. I don't remember much else. Since then, I've been trapped in this crumbling village in the middle of Yorkshire moors. My wife and I had stumbled across it on our way to a seaside holiday. We fell in love with the rugged ruralness and bought a cottage on the outskirts. It was to be a private getaway where we'd grow old together. Now I'm just old and alone. The last 18 years have found me drinking away my fortune. There's one pub in the village, the Steel and Oak, built in 1797. You'd be forgiven for thinking that decor hadn't been updated since then. A cold and barren place where only the desperate would drink. I'd spend my nights with one or two alcoholics, farmers mostly, I think. We had nothing in common, so we kept ourselves to ourselves. Occasionally a lost tourist would stumble into the decrepit pub. They were always on their way to something nicer, most of the time, but had gotten lost or their car had broken down. I helped a few of them, I think. I remember giving lifts as long as they didn't mind a bit of buzz driving. None of them stayed very long. Why would anyone want to spend their days with a sad drunk? As my wife would say, I think. This afternoon a blizzard came in from the coast. The forecast said snow was going to hit the valley for at least the next 3 days. Around 3 o'clock, a young couple came blustering in from the snow. You could tell they were tourists, dressed in bright neon winter outfits that stung against the dark pub. I was going to take a few bottles home and drink myself through the storm, but the fella insisted on buying me another round. There was a desperation in his voice that made me suspect I was in the presence of a fellow alcoholic. Don't get many free drinks in this village, so got to take them where you can. He was called John, a tall man, slim in some places, fat in others. His receding hair was partially hidden under a green bandana. She was called Jane, a pretty young thing, dressed in a yellow puffa jacket with dark hair and blonde highlights. And so the drinking began. John and Jane were happy and beautiful and polite. It made me sick. I wanted to hate them. Their joyousness made no sense in my world, but I was having an unfortunately good time. She asked if I remembered her. Something had been floating amongst the burnt remains of my brain, a flickering image, maybe a smell. I couldn't grasp it though. My memory was turned to dust. I've been known to even forget my own name at times. Her smile faded. She said her last name was Hardwick. Family friends, I think. Must have been one of the wife's many acquaintances. She was always entertaining people, hosting weekends so friends can enjoy what she liked to call the real outdoors. Jane must have been young when my wife was obliterated at the bottom of that cliff. Jane asked if I ever redecorated the hallway. It was a phrase that stung. My wife despised the garish pink and blue flowered wallpaper and constantly demanded it get stripped away. The problem was the room had towering high ceilings, meaning the walls stood like giant monoliths. It would have taken at least a week to strip it all, and at the time, I thought I had better things to do. John let out a sharp, harsh laugh. I changed the subject. After a few more drinks, I excused myself to go to the toilet. The urinal had been mysteriously smashed the week before, so I locked myself away in the cubicle and treated myself to a sit-down piss. Just as I was about to start, the bathroom opened and I heard someone squeak in across the tile floor. They stopped outside the cubicle. A pair of expensive walking boots looked up at me from the gap underneath the stall. The shoes had barely got a lick of dirt on them. "That you, Josh?" I slurred. It was John. He didn't realize the urinal was broken. I sat in silence for 20 seconds as I tried to piss. No chance, so I surrendered the cubicle. John had been waiting so close to the door his nose must have almost touched it. He said that it was a shame that I didn't remember his wife. I agreed. It was. I had forgotten a lot of lovely things in my life, and she seemed like a lovely young lady. I told him. "She was," he said. He stared at me for a moment before sliding into the cubicle. Back at the table, Jane was staring out the window. The snow was picking up something fierce. It was being thrown around the landscape by an angry gale. Strange tunes whistled through the holes in the window frame. There was a newfound sadness on Jane's face. She asked again if I remembered her. I lied and said that I did. It was unconvincing. Her face drooped further. The blizzard pounded against the window. A pang of guilt spurred me to offer them a lift. They were staying at Old Man Farm, just a bit further out from my house. Jane gave me a wonky smile, but I could tell it wasn't real. She put her hands over mine. They felt soft and warm. Her eyes were like emeralds dazzling in the firelight. She told me that she was sorry. What for? I asked, but John appeared at the table and downed the last of his pint. He said it was time to leave. The blizzard was raging when we clambered into my rusted Land Rover and left the village. I could barely see beyond the car bonnet as the white flakes whipped around us. Everything had turned into mounds of snow of varying sizes. Hills, trees, houses. Even the road signs had vanished into the whiteness, meaning I had to make my way back from memory. I made several wrong turns and had to spin the car around on the gathering ice. Julie and Jim were barely paying attention. Harsh whispers formed small clouds of fog from their mouths. The word pathetic was muttered a few times. Eventually, Jane folded her arms and stared down at her feet. The windscreen wipers were the only sound for the rest of the journey as I watched Jeremy scowl at me through the rearview mirror. By the time we got to mine, the blizzard was screaming and pulling at the car. The rest of the journey would be downhill and treacherous even in the best of weather. There was no way Julian and Janet were getting back. I offered for them to wait it out back at mine. I had a few frozen chicken tikka masala meals and more than enough booze to tie us over. John looked ready to deny the offer, but Jane cut him off. She would love to stay, apparently. John glared out the window and told her not to waste her time through his gritted teeth. The passenger door opened and Jane silently got out. "Women, eh?" "Son." John leant his head against the glass and told me that he hated me. He would never forgive me for what I had done to Judith. "What did I do?" I asked. He told me that I don't remember. My head started to hurt. It was piercing, like a hot needle through the eye. My mouth tasted like sulfur. The rush of blood squeezed through my ears. I told him that I was sorry. He just grunted and got out of the car. I took a bottle of golden ale out from the plastic bag beneath my feet and popped it open with a twist of my car keys. 3 deep burning gulps and it was done. I felt better. I couldn't see John and Jane at the front door. I called out their names into the freezing void. Every shout was taken by the breeze. After a few desperate attempts of calling them, I gave up and decided to warm up inside. Maybe they would be easier to spot from the windows of the upper floor. I slid my key into the lock, but the door was already open. I've never been too fussed about home security, but I could have sworn I locked it today. Jamie and Jill were already inside, their voices barking away from the kitchen. Their argument turned fierce. Wails bounced off the pink and blue hallway walls. Jennifer cried out that Jordan was a self-absorbed monster. Justin accused Jade of being a dirty little flirt. A plate smashed on the floor. I asked if everything was okay. Jim told me to fuck off and that I was a fat waste of space. Jill screamed at him to stop talking to me like that. I held my breath and crept upstairs. I snuck into the bathroom as the shouting continued. I clicked the lock closed and sat down on the side of the bath. John accused Jane of wanting to leave him. He was slurring. Jane asked why would anyone want to spend their days with a sad drunk. And I began to cry. I wish I could say I remembered her. I wish I could say I remembered my own name. But my mind is ash, a burnt inferno of crushed steel at the bottom of some cliff. My name is John Hardwick. My wife Jane was killed when her car skidded off the road and rolled down a 150-foot cliff. I was supposed to take the car to the garage and replace the worn brake pads. I went to the pub instead. I forgot to tell her. I forgot. They've stopped arguing now, but I can still hear them moving around the house. I think they're looking for me. Stop crying, Jane. I remember now. I remember. There's a niche activity that occupies most of my time, and it's risky. To many, it would seem unthinkable in its danger, but not to me. Not at first, anyway. I know how much of a mistake I made. The reason I started this in the first place is because while this activity is not technically legal, the cash rewards are incredibly high. Some would consider it murder. I would consider it well-paying. I'm sure if the UN ever found out about it, the activity would be banned, but hey, even if that happens, I'll still continue doing what I'm doing. I really don't have any other option. There's a good chance that I'll end up dead because of this. Maybe it's inevitable, but still I dread it. Still I fear it. I'm trapped and I don't know how to escape. As for what it is I actually do, it's simple. I change the flow of time. I make it so that certain people never existed. It's like murder, but with no evidence and no suspects. Apparently, I've killed all sorts. Businessmen, crime bosses, even politicians. But the thing is, I don't remember any of it. Once a person is erased from the flow of time, no one remembers them. They cease to exist. They never existed. And so therefore, I don't remember killing them in the first place. A freaky concept. One that probably appears interesting even to those who would never believe it. But not to me. All I want to do is get out, but I can't. I'm trapped, constantly looking over my shoulder, wondering when they'll get me. But I bet some of you are probably thinking, What about the grandfather paradox? Wouldn't it be impossible for me to stop someone from existing if they never existed? Well, my employer found a workaround, a way to cheat the system. Using that cheat has ruined my life. To sum it up, the universe has a natural defense network for paradoxes, a kind of immune system but on a cosmic scale. Typically, if for whatever reason a paradox would appear naturally, the universe would send antibodies to eliminate that paradox. If that paradox happened to be a human who shouldn't exist, well, the antibodies would take care of it in a very grim way. Gruesome things, those antibodies. They look kind of like people, but inside out. There's a million different variants. I doubt I'll ever see them all. The fact that I never know what the next one will look like is part of what keeps me up at night. Upon seeing their target, they absorb them alive, making sure every atom of their existence is disbanded in a horrific display of nature's power. The first time I saw it, I threw up. I was so disgusted by what I had seen. I just sat there crying for hours. There was no one to comfort me but my employer. He told me this was just the way of things. Those that are strong devour the weak. Those that are able to win claim victory. He told me that as long as I stayed strong, it would never happen to me. He lied, but that was years ago. I've learned so much since then. Things my job as a murderer rely on. Things I wish I didn't know. It was my employer who taught me. He found out that the immune system could be tricked and made to kill any person you want. A key detail that made the whole thing work was that when the antibodies receive orders, they remember them, regardless of if the timeline should change. Therefore, they'll remember orders issued from humans who in the new timeline never gave those orders. They exist separate from us and our rules. The antibodies will follow orders, even if they were given from a dead timeline. The fact is what makes us able to kill people. It's a bit of an elaborate process, but it works, I think. You see, I can't remember doing it. I know how to, but I can't remember having ever done the process, though my employer says I've killed many people. Such a funny thing to be a mass murderer and not remember any of it. Maybe I'd be interested to know just how many people I've erased, but bigger things occupy my thoughts now. With time comes wisdom. With time comes perspective. The antibodies are after me now. I've killed so many. Maybe it's just karma. Looking back on it now, it was only going to be a matter of time until the luck ran out. I realize now why my employer hired all of us instead of just doing it himself. One human should only draw so much attention to themselves. Because you see, the universe knows what we did. It knows we're a virus, an infection that's misdirecting cells in the body. And now it's fighting back, sending those antibodies to kill me and save the host. I keep fighting them, but it's getting harder. They're getting stronger and they never stop coming. My life is a living hell. The antibodies are relentless, demons that are horrific in their ability to end human lives. I've seen some that spit acid, others that mimic human voice, several small enough to crawl through air ducts, others large enough to devour me whole. I can't do this, but I'm too scared to give up. I could kill 5 one day. There'd just be 6 the next. And though I've killed so many of them, it never gets easier. It never gets better. They disgust me. The thought of them haunts me, because on some deep, unknowable level, they are wrong. Your mind knows you shouldn't be seeing them. They play tricks on you, Something about seeing them at all wreaks havoc on the human psyche. I knew a friend who gouged out her own eyes before they got to her. That's how I've been living. That's my life. Maybe if I quit this job, then the antibodies would leave me alone, but I can't do that. My employer would just have another employee erase me from existence. No loose ends. And so that's how it goes. Oh God. I don't have long left. But I wanted to mention one more thing. One terrible fact my employer told me. He's the only one who can see dead timelines. The only person I can't send the antibodies against. And what he said shocked me. He revealed to me a horrible truth, and I believe him. He tells me sometimes what the dead timelines were like. And now that I know the truth, I am filled with grief for our species. A sense of loss I never knew I could feel. The worst part is no one knows. They all go about their daily lives as if everything is fine. But what we think is normal is merely the rotten corpse of what humanity once was. Before countless timelines were genocided and those who controlled time died out to just one victor, things were very different. And even though I hate the employer, hearing of our past, of all our atrocities, crimes, and vile acts we as a species committed to using this power, brings me to tears. We used the antibodies once for a war out of a nightmare, a version of us long ago. And now we've fallen. We've fallen so far we can't even begin to understand what we once were. The human population in 2021 was not originally 7 billion. It was 50 billion. And we once spread so far and wide across creation. Now all that's left is the scattered survivors of a massacre, the pathetic remains of something once beautiful. I'm cursed to know this as long as I live. And though my life continues to spiral, and the monsters grow stranger and stronger, I won't give up. I'm too afraid of what it will feel like if an antibody devours me.